What is up, Flick fans, and welcome back to my channel. So on my birthday on July 21st, a few weeks back, I got a request to do a video that I found extremely interesting. It is my favorite film from every single year I've been alive, and for me that would be 1995 all the way to 2019. Now, this is not an original idea. I've seen it before. Sean Chandler, Zach Pope, just a few people on YouTube that have done this. It's such a cool video idea. I've watched every single one that I've seen pop up on my subscription feed because it's interesting to see where people are coming from and how movies affect them, especially when you dig down deep into the earlier years of their life. What affected them growing up and how they look back upon these movies however many years later to see how they resonate. And I want you guys in the comments section down below, if you want to do every year you've been alive, that's fine. If you want to do your top 10 from the last 10 years, whatever it is, I want to see movies. This is a video about the movies that we love. And like I said, I'm 24 years old now. Officially, I'm doing it every year until now. Now, 2019, I'll still give you guys my favorite movie of the year so far, but check in about 6 months from now. There's a possibility that movie changes because we're only a little over halfway through the year, but I'm still going to talk about it. All right. Big video, we need to get going with this, and we start with the year 1995, the very first year I was on this earth. So for each one of these, I'm going to give you guys an honorable mention, what came very close, and then give you and talk about my favorite film. So the honorable mention for 1995 is Braveheart. Love that movie. I've watched it multiple times. It still holds up. I think it's a fantastic film, but my favorite movie of that year is Toy Story. And part of that could be the fact that I literally grew up with this movie. I watched it on VHS I don't know how many times. I told you guys in my Pixar video, it is one of those movies that I have watched more than really any other. I mean, this and The Incredibles, a lot of Pixar films on there, but Toy Story still resonates with me to this day. I've already talked about it multiple times this year, but the fact that you have that relationship, that friendship in a Woody and Buzz, it took a while to get there, but it delivered at the end of the day, and it is one of those movies that I still think about to this second. And the fact that we're still getting Toy Story movies in 2019, that's pretty cool, and that's why it's my favorite movie of 1995. We move on to 1996, a very possibly unexpected shout out to Happy Gilmore. Happy Gilmore, she said, listen, I'm a fan of the Adam Sandler of old. That movie I've watched more times than probably any comedy from that specific year, or really any comedy from the 90s. I love it so much. It's hilarious to this day, but it's not my favorite. My favorite is Fargo. Fargo is one of those movies that took me on a journey, on an adventure. Now, it's not one that I grew up with, obviously. I didn't actually watch Fargo until I was around 13 or 14 years old, and then I discovered that it was actually from 1996, but it didn't feel like it was that old of a film. And I don't mean to say old to offend people, I just mean it felt like it was a movie that came from the early 2000s. It was so far ahead of its time, the relationship between the characters, the character building, and really just what the Coen brothers do now that we respect and love so much. This is one of the first times that they did it with Fargo. It was so good, it spawned a television series that is loved, but the reason it's loved is because this first movie worked so well, and Fargo is one of those, if you have not seen it, it's a bit slow, it takes a bit to get there, but the intensity and really the standoffs in the movie are some of the best I've seen in quite a while. Next up, in 1997, my shout out goes to the Jim Carrey film Liar Liar, another comedy that I absolutely love. Fun fact, Jim Carrey was my favorite actor of all time growing up, from Ace Ventura to Dumb and Dumber to Liar Liar. I loved pretty much every single one of his films, and this is one that I watch to this day and I laugh. The blooper reel at the end, that's what really gets to me. But the movie that is number one on my list from that year is actually Good Will Hunting. I think this is one of the perfect movies from that time, and it's almost a perfect film in itself, right? I rarely give movies a 100%. If I'm giving this movie a grade, it's a 100%. Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, the direction, and of course, Robin Williams and his performance, one of the best monologues in history when they're sitting on the bench. It's all about a smart guy who refuses to show the fact that he is a smart guy. He doesn't live up to his potential. Everyone is trying to pull it out of him. It's a struggle that we can all relate with. No, we don't have the same abilities as he does, but it's just something that we can apply to our own lives, and that's one of the reasons why the movie resonates with me to this day. Probably in my top 25-ish of all time. That video is coming shortly, by the way. Next up, in 1998, a shout out before we get to number 1 in Waterboy, another Adam Sandler movie, but this one's really funny because it's so quotable. I love Waterboy. It's a random choice, but once again, I'm not saying these are the best movies of these respective years. I'm saying these are my favorite movies and my favorite film of that year, and another one that's probably going to crack my top 30, top 40-ish of all time is Saving Private Ryan, my numero uno, number 1 favorite Steven Spielberg movie. I just love this film and every single thing about it. This is Tom Hanks' best performance to date, in my opinion, or at least the one that I hold closest to my heart. It is the ultimate war film. The action is incredible. The violence is awesome. The emotional moments, the soft moments that are supposed to touch you and make you feel a certain way, they absolutely do. And Spielberg's direction just blows me away every single time I watch that movie. It is, at this point in my life, one of, if not my favorite war movies of all time. Next up on this list is 1999, my honorable mention. Not my number 1, it's going to surprise some people. My honorable mention is Fight Club. And don't get me wrong, I love Fight Club, I love Fincher, I love everything about that movie. But once again, 1999, you're growing up, you're coming of age, you're becoming, well, really at the time, a boy, but who later on becomes a man. This was the Iron Giant, the ultimate boy and his dog film, one of Vin Diesel's best performances ever, and all he does is kind of make noises and talk just a little bit, but I just love this movie. It is heartfelt, it is emotional. It's a film that didn't do very well at the box office, and not a lot of people talked about it at the time, but now people look back on it as an animated classic, and the way that it affected me at that time when I first saw it, when it came out, I didn't watch it in theaters, but I saw it as soon as it came out on VHS, I believe the year after, but I grew up with it. I think about it and honestly I'll get a little teary-eyed. It's one of those films that just affects me in that way. Not saying it's the best of that year, because Fight Club is probably a better movie, but The Iron Giant was my favorite movie of 1999. 2000, we're talking at number 2, Unbreakable. M. Night Shyamalan's movie, my favorite one of his films, comes in right below number 1, but number 1, you have to go with Gladiator. That is absolutely my favorite film of that year. The direction by Ridley Scott is magnificent. Joaquin Phoenix's villain is one of the best villains, in my opinion, of the 2000s. But you have to talk about Russell Crowe. Russell Crowe blows everyone away in this movie. The music, the cinematography, the depth of the characters. One of the best movies capturing that time period of all time. And that is why it's my favorite movie of 2000. We move on to 2001. My number 2 favorite movie of that year is actually Shrek. I'm a big fan of Shrek. Not just because he's a meme, but it's genuinely a good film if you go back and watch. But I have to go with Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. I grew up with this trilogy. Now, I took some time off. I watched it when I was really young multiple times, and I took probably about 10 years off. Watched it again when I was like 16 or 17 and could not stop watching it for about a 3-year period. I love it so much. When I met my wife, I realized how big of a fan she was of these films, so we watched them together and celebrated them. This trilogy means everything to me, and that is why Fellowship of the Ring, the first one, the OG, the original, the one that brought us Gandalf and Frodo and all of these characters, is my favorite movie of that year. This time, the honorable mention is going to Lord of the Rings. That is Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. My favorite movie of that year is one that took me a bit to get to. Didn't watch it when it first came out in 2002. I believe it was like 2012, 2013 when I first saw it. But that is Spirited Away. Oh my God. Listen, if you like anime, if you like animation, if you like crazy, upbeat, wild storytelling, but some of the best looking animation and some of the most incredible character depth you've ever seen, go and watch Spirited Away, the filmmaking. And we know they've brought us so many movies, but Spirited Away probably, in that entire genre, honestly, total package of anime, I think Spirited Away is my favorite movie, and it's definitely my favorite movie of that year. One of my favorite animated movies of all time. If you haven't seen it, seek it out, find it. It was actually playing in my Cinemark recently. I didn't get to see it because I had to see a new release, but oh, what a treat that would be to see in theaters. Next up, 2003, a shout out to my number 2, Elf. Love Elf. Jon Favreau, Will Ferrell, I mean, enough said. Listen, one of the greatest Christmas movies of all time. In my opinion, it's another film that I grew up with, and I would put this probably like third or fourth on my most watched movies of all time because we watch it every Christmas. We watch it like almost every Thanksgiving. We watch this movie a ridiculous amount, but I love it so much because of that. But you can't put Elf above Return of the King, right? Lord of the Rings, making its way back to this list. It is my favorite movie in that trilogy. It is one of the best films I've ever seen. It brings everything together in this incredibly epic way. I know a lot of people don't like the fact that it drags on for so long and the multiple endings, and I get their critique, but I was so attached to these characters. I was so excited to see where they were going to end up. I think Return of the King just captures everything about filmmaking that I love, and it is absolutely, no question, my favorite movie of that year. 2004 is an interesting year because for so long I had my number 2 spot at my number 1 spot. My favorite movie used to be Incredibles, and it's still one of my favorite movies of all time. I love The Incredibles. It is probably my favorite Pixar film. But I have to talk about Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which has since surpassed The Incredibles as my favorite movie of that year. I believe it's in my top 10 favorite movies of all time. If you haven't seen this movie and you love a good romantic story. Okay, it's not all about the romance. It's a romantic story that brings in sci-fi elements. This cast is incredible. It's dramatic. It's thrilling. The filmmaking is some of the best I've ever seen. The score gets stuck in my head every single time that I watch it. And everything about this movie completely blows me away every time I watch it. It's all about Jim Carrey, this guy who wants to go back and erase this relationship from his head entirely, but then he realized that maybe he's making a mistake, and he did love this girl for a reason, and that's why this movie affects me so greatly. I recently showed it to my wife. She was blown away. I was so happy that she was. I recommend this to literally anyone who has any kind of streaming, or if you have internet connection, go watch Eternal Sunshine. It's an incredible movie. We come to 2005. My honorable mention for that year is 40-Year-Old Virgin. This is another comedy that just, it's up there in terms of one of my favorites of all time. The standout scenes, the characters, the cast, Seth Rogen, Paul Rudd, Steve Carell. I mean, no one knew what talent they had on screen at the time. It is so good, so funny. It's utterly rewatchable. But it's not my number 1. My number 1 of that year is Batman Begins. And I have to admit, when this movie first dropped, 2005, I believe I was 10, 11 years old at the time, and it scared me to death. This was not my Batman. This was not Michael Keaton. This was not George Clooney. I was young. I enjoyed those movies. Now I hate the George Clooney movie. But as I have grown up, I have watched it more. I've come to appreciate the film and the establishment for the character of Batman. My favorite interpretation of the character in Christian Bale, Christopher Nolan, what he did with these films. This is one of the first times I watched a movie and I said, who directed that? And I was super young at the time, but who's this Chris Nolan guy? And he goes on to become one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, of the modern era. I love Batman Begins. You guys have probably heard me talk about it before, but that's why it's my favorite movie of 2005. 2006, my number 2 is Children of Men. And I think Children of Men is an absolute masterpiece of a film. Oh my God, everything about that, from the direction to the acting, it is on point, top notch. But my favorite of that year is Martin Scorsese's The Departed. Mark Wahlberg, Matt Damon, and of course, Leonardo DiCaprio. What a cast, what a crew, what a film. It just dives deep into aspects, the rats, people that get away with things that they should not get away with, and it's all just this big showcase of good versus evil, the corrupt, the gangsters, all of it. It works so well, and one of the best performances I've ever seen from Mark Wahlberg, by the way. Mark Wahlberg, hey, how's it going? Sometimes I'm in a movie where I'm not getting chased by a transformer. It's crazy. Let's move on. Next up is 2007. My number 2 spot is, and this is always the big battle going on in 2007, is it There Will Be Blood or is it this other movie? My number 2 is There Will Be Blood, Daniel Day-Lewis's best performance to date. This movie is one of those that is going to be showcased in film classes to come. It's long, it takes its time, but if you get attached to these characters and Paul Dano's character, I mean, there's just nothing bad that can come from this movie. It is so good, and the writing is some of the best writing I've ever seen. But the winner of that battle for me is No Country for Old Men. No Country for Old Men features one of the best villainous performances by Javier Bardem I have ever seen. It is my definitive villain of that year, one of my favorite villains of that decade. That and the Joker, probably my two favorite. It's just every time he's on screen, but it's not just him. It's Josh Brolin. It's Tommy Lee Jones. I mean, Tommy Lee Jones kills it in this movie. And of course, back to the Coen brothers, the direction is what carries it. I love this movie so much, and that's why it's my favorite movie of that year. Oh wait, I mean, this is probably the most Austin Burke thing you've ever seen. My number 2 is Iron Man. You guys know how much I love Iron Man. My number 1 is The Dark Knight, and you can't really see the poster. It's my giant Joker poster, but it's my favorite. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say it's my favorite movie of all time, because that will be revealed when I do that list, but yeah, you probably... I don't even want to talk about it. You guys know how much I love it, and I'm going to save it for another video because you know it's going to pop back up. Let's move on to 2009. My number 2 of that year is actually Inglorious Basterds. That is one of my favorite Quentin Tarantino movies. You guys actually just saw my list yesterday. That came to my channel, and I don't need to talk about it too much more, but yeah, that film goes off the rails in the best way possible. My number 1 is interesting, and this is probably the first majorly controversial movie on this list, and not one that everyone's going to be on board with, but once again, it's my favorites. I love the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies, and it all spawned from the first one. This is my favorite of that series. The other ones are probably in my top 10, 15s of their respective years, but this is the one that really stood out to me as incredible modern sci-fi. At the time, of course, but it just blew me away. Yes, it's more Star Wars-y than Star Trek-y, but the cast, I mean, Chris Pine was perfect. Perfect in the role. I love Spock, I love Bones, I love the entire cast and crew. Everything about that film just gave me everything I wanted in a Star Trek reboot, and the fact that it connected to the original was awesome as well. I know it's an odd choice, but that is my favorite movie of that year. We move on to 2010. Putting The Social Network at number 2 actually hurts my heart because it is one of my top 20, at this point, favorite movies of all time. 25, it's around there. But one that manages to be even higher than that. One that is in my top 10 movies of all time. Once again, Social Network not being number 1. My heart is aching. Inception is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's when Christopher Nolan really took my mind, he just put it in a blender, and he just hit the on switch, and he set it all the way to 10. It's going crazy in there. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I remember watching, I was with my mom, my cousins, and my aunt, and we all walked out, and we were like, what the... But I've watched it 10, 15 times since, and every single time I've watched this movie, I've gotten more out of it. The plot makes more sense. I have my theories about the ending. Well, I did have my theories. At first, I'm like, nah, he's not a dream. And now I'm like, yeah, he's in a dream, but we really don't know. The answer to that question is only known by 3 people: Christopher Nolan, Leonardo DiCaprio, and God. And he's not telling us. 2011, number 2, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Just a magnificent ending to this franchise that I've not even talked about on this list, but probably all of the movies are in like the top 10, top 15 movies of that respective year, but that is definitely my number 2 of that year. My number 1 of that year is Warrior, one of the greatest fight movies ever made. I love Warrior so much. Tom Hardy, Joel Edgerton, Frank Grillo. I mean, the cast is magnificent. You have Gavin O'Connor's direction, who has actually went on to have a pretty good career. I'm excited to see what route he takes next, but Warrior, if you like the MMA, if you love Tom Hardy, if you love a good brotherly story, friendship, family, it's emotional, it's not your cliche, it's not your average fight MMA film, watch Warrior. You will not be disappointed. It's one of my favorite fight movies of all time. 2012. A great year for movies. Now, these 2 movies constantly flip. I can't tell you how many times I have changed these on my letterbox list. Right now, I'm going Looper at number 2. No joke. I just changed that in my head. I had them flipped. And then Django Unchained at number 1. Looper is one of my favorite it is my favorite Rian Johnson movies. It absolutely blew me away. One of the cooler time travel films I've ever seen, but I have to go Django. Maybe it's where I'm in a Quentin Tarantino mood, and it is, you guys saw in the video yesterday, it is my favorite Quentin Tarantino film. I just love it so much, every aspect of it. I don't want to hit too much more on it because I've already talked about it, but Django Unchained, man, it's long, it's obnoxious.
That's what she said.
But in the best way possible. 2013, the runner-up goes to The Conjuring. It's one of my favorite horror films of all time. Yes, it feels more like a studio horror film, and we've since gotten more artistic and probably better made movies, but I just love The Conjuring for what it is. My number one, though, we're going to start riding this Denis Villeneuve train. Denis Villeneuve brings us Prisoners, and it's one of my absolute favorite movies from Hugh Jackman, from Jake Gyllenhaal, from Denis Villeneuve. I mean, everything about this movie works. It's about a father who loses his daughter. Well, two fathers who lose their daughters. But Hugh Jackman's character in this movie, man, he is ruthless. He will do whatever it takes to get his daughter back. But it's not only the story and the plot, it's the filmmaking, man. The score, the cinematography, the look of this movie. It's when I started to fall in love with Villeneuve as a filmmaker, and it is honestly one of the reasons why he is my number one favorite director right now. If you haven't seen Prisoners, it's a bit long. It's absolutely dramatic, but if you have the patience and you're not a parent who is afraid something may happen to your children, I recommend watching this movie. Next up, 2014. We're getting really good, folks. We're talking Winter Soldier at the honorable mentions position. I love Winter Soldier. It is one of my favorite movies in the MCU, but I can't put it over Whiplash. Whiplash blew me away the first time I saw it. It's blown me away every single time since. It's the best music movie that is not a musical that I've ever seen. It gave me a brand new respect for Miles Teller. Damien Chazelle comes on the scene, and he just has this major mic drop. But the reason why I love this movie the way that I love this movie is the performance from J.K. Simmons, the best supporting actor performance I think I've ever seen in my life. I think it's my number one. It is phenomenal. Everything about this movie works. The filmmaking is fantastic. The style is one of the cooler styles I've ever seen, and that's one of the reasons why it's my favorite movie of that year, 2015. At number 2, a movie that just recently came to number 2. That is Spotlight. Spotlight is magnificent. It's one of the only times this decade where I've not been, that actually kind of deserved to win Best Picture. All the other years I'm like, okay. Now, I did have my favorite that year to win Best Picture, and my number one is Mad Max Fury Road. At the time, I'm like, yeah, Mad Max is amazing. It's brilliant. But now I'm like, yeah, Mad Max might be an action masterpiece. I mean, George Miller, what he did with that film is something that we've never seen before in the action genre. The showcase of special effects mixed with practical effects, more practical than anything. The stunt work and the choreography. This is one of the reasons why the Oscars needs that category, because I don't know how nothing didn't happen to the men that did these stunts. I mean, this is a ridiculously insane movie in the best way possible, and I love it for all of those reasons mentioned above. 2016. We're getting close, folks. My number 2 is one that I recently put at number 2. I had La La Land at number 2, and I love that movie so much, but this is one that I keep thinking about, and it's not slipped my mind over the last couple of years, and I've went back and I've watched and I've appreciated the performance by Amy Adams, and that is Arrival. Once again, Denis Villeneuve. Arrival, it's just one of those sci-fi films, man. I love it. With everything in me, I love it. But I can't put it above Sing Street. Sing Street is that movie. You know, everybody has that movie that not a lot of people have seen, not a lot of people talk about. It didn't get nominated for anything. It didn't have, it had a really high score on Rotten Tomatoes, but no one was clamoring for it at the end of the year. That's my movie. I loved everything about this. Coming of age story. It's a bit of a musical thrown in there, but not really. Jack Rayner's performance as the brother, and it's the brotherly story. It's all about a young boy who wants to start this band. He starts it. He goes for his dreams. He will not let anything stop him, and there's a relationship in there that makes me want to cry when I think about it. And the ending to Sing Street is one of the best endings to any movie that I've ever seen. If you guys haven't seen it, go watch it. If you have seen it, well, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Next up, 2017. My runner-up is Blade Runner 2049. Yeah, the masterpiece runner-up. I know, what am I doing? Denis Villeneuve pops his head up once again. My favorite movie of that year was Logan. Logan blew me away in every possible aspect. I mean, Hugh Jackman as this character, he's come a long way. He's had some really bad movies. He's had some okay movies. He's had some good movies. But Logan is by far my favorite movie in the X-Men universe. It is by far one of my favorite comic book movies of all time, and it is one of those that just sticks with you. I've watched it countless times, 9 or 10 times since it released, and every single time I watch it, I appreciate the filmmaking. James Mangold, can't wait to see what he does this year with his movie coming out. I just love the guy as a movie maker. I love this cast, and I love this story, and what a way for this character to go out. Spoilers for that movie. 2018. All right, guys. Infinity War is my number 2 favorite movie of last year. Austin, didn't you say American Animals was your favorite movie on your list? Well, that's changed. American Animals is now at 3, Infinity War is now at 2, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is my favorite movie of last year. I've watched it countless times. I've told people about it. I've showed it to people. It is my favorite Spider-Man movie. It just does everything you want a comic book movie to do, and it's the first time I've ever seen a comic book come to life. I mean, maybe the 2003 Hulk movie, but it didn't work in that film, in my opinion. This film, it works. It works very well. I think animation helps it. I think the new form of animation helped it even more. The voice cast is magnificent. The fact that you can have so many characters, I mean, all of these Spider-Man, and then you have Nicolas Cage as Spider-Man Noir. That was really cool. And I even came to grow into the villain. At first, I'm like, yeah, Kingpin's the weakest part of the movie, but now I'm like, Kingpin is really comic book accurate. He's this towering figure over everyone else. I love the way that everything was drawn in this movie, and just the attention to detail, the depth that this film goes into. It is, God, guys, it's magnificent. It's magnificent. It's my favorite movie of last year. And then we come to 2019. Since we're doing honorable mentions, right now, you know, I can't definitively say anything. I have Midsommar up there. I have Once Upon a Time in Hollywood up there. Toy Story 4 is like nipping at the heels. But Avengers Endgame is my favorite movie of this year so far. I loved everything about it. I love everything I keep seeing. We keep getting all of these deleted scenes and the blooper reels, and I'm like, just let me get the movie in my hands on the Blu-rays. I love everything about it. That could easily change because there are a lot of films to come out, the Oscar contenders that could absolutely take that spot, but it's going to be a hard thing to do because I love this film so much. But guys, what a massive video. What an incredible time I had rehashing, remembering, talking about all of these movies. I got nostalgic while making this video. I just had listen, this is a channel that loves movies. Not me specifically, everyone. We come together, we create what I like to call Flick Fan Nation, but it's just this big amalgamation of movie lovers and movie fans and people who can come together to talk about the fact that we just want to see great films come to the theater and celebrate that every single weekend. I truly appreciate everyone, even the people who click on my video just to leave a dislike. I have those. They do it as soon as I post, but you know what? You're still supporting my video. I mean, you're still clicking on it, so I appreciate it. The time that's being taken out of everyone's schedules. You guys, I always say it, are the absolute best. A very possible live stream later on today. We're visiting family, actually right now, but I'm hoping to be back home and do that and take on whatever I have to take on for you guys. I appreciate the support. I hope you guys comment your thoughts below. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up. It really does help this channel every single video. I'm not going to say it needs it, but I certainly appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you very soon.